It's no secret that playing on keyboard and mouse in Call of Duty isn't exactly the easiest task. It's probably one of the few first-person shooter games where playing on KBM might seem like a disadvantage most times, and it's really tailored in a way to be played on controller. I've tried Call of Duty using keyboard, mouse, Xbox controllers, and PlayStation 5 controllers, and I've drawn some conclusions from my time trying out all of the different peripherals, and today I'll be answering the question, can a KBM player even compete in Call of Duty Black Ops 6 or Call of Duty in general, or should you just make the switch to controller? But before we get into the video, be sure to subscribe with notifications set to all so you don't miss out on another upload. Alright, let's get right into it. When I was younger, like many people, I grew up with a console, and I played on my trusty Xbox 360. I also used to play on PS3 when I went over to friends' houses and things like that, so controllers were pretty integral to my early gaming experience. Up until maybe around 2020, I was playing exclusively on controllers and pretty much on an Xbox. I managed to get my hands on a gaming laptop for university a few years back when I was a student, and since then I've not been able to really play on controller the way I used to when it comes to first and third person shooter titles. I started playing Call of Duty with a keyboard and mouse back when Modern Warfare 2019 came out, and I'll refer to keyboard and mouse as KBM from now on for, simplicity's sake, because I don't feel like saying it out loud, every single time. For the most part, it was a struggle at first because there's a lot of factors that go into the performance of KBM in games, especially in competitive ones. The DPI you set on your mouse, the sensitivity, the actual surface you're using the mouse on, the weight of the mouse, the actuation point of the keyboard, what switches your keyboard uses, if your keyboard is mechanical or membrane, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it feels confusing to try to figure all these things out at first, and the challenging part about KBM is that all of a sudden, the controller is basically your entire arm. Now, for the most part, most of what you do on KBM deals with your wrist and your ability to flick and concentrate your aim when you're playing a game like this. Aiming is super important in Call of Duty with KBM because there's just no aim assist, right? And now you have to actually rely on your own skills and abilities. The nice thing with KBM though is that it feels accomplishing in a way. There's something satisfying about knowing that you figured it out and can top the leaderboard in a video game while playing with KBM. It's in a way pretty satisfying. I also found it a lot of fun personally because I started researching so many different keyboards and mice and things like that until I settled on my favorite options. I've gone through quite a good number of peripherals in the past, and I was honestly invested in that entire searching and testing process. If you want to know what peripherals I'm currently using, check out the links in the description below. That's where I've got all my recommended stuff listed. Anyways, the learning curve on KBM is definitely not an easy one to mantle, but once you figure it out, it becomes a breeze. The only issue is that with my sudden new mastery of gaming on KBM, I wasn't exactly as good on controller anymore. I still play single player games like Assassin's Creed for instance with a controller, but those don't really require the competitive skill that games like Call of Duty require in order to do good, and they just don't really concentrate on accuracy. Plus, they're games I play for fun, so I don't really care to be good at them or not, and also, some games were just made for controller, like Elden Ring for instance, which I can't imagine playing on anything other than a controller. I'm sure it's doable enough on KBM, but it doesn't really click in my head to play it that way. The thing with first-person shooters though is that Call of Duty definitely wasn't my first nor my only first-person shooter that I played at the same time. Around the time I started playing Call of Duty, I had also been playing CSGO, and I got into games like Rainbow Six Siege, both of which are a better experience on KBM. So I couldn't really drop KBM to master controller for one game that wasn't even the majority of my gameplay at the time, and as such, we are here today. I've since stopped playing some of the other FPS games I used to play, but I still maintained my gaming time with Call of Duty, and now I'm at a point where I basically can only play first-person shooter and third-person shooter titles on KBM. But I've been doing a lot of research and things like that, and I found that apparently KBM isn't really that popular with Call of Duty, even among PC players who will use controllers plugged into their PCs. In fact, I started to see a pattern where people who play on KBM were talking about basically it being impossible to face off against controller players. Ranked players especially discussed in many threads online why it's more optimal to use a controller over KBM in Call of Duty, and how out of all of the FPS games out there, Call of Duty is basically made to be played on with a controller more than it is with KBM. This was a bit of a revelation. I wasn't aware that so many PC players just opted to use controller. I mean, I noticed many YouTubers did, but I never really thought about why that was. I just assumed maybe, they grew up playing on controller and they were just used to the way it felt. However, I figured I'd try and actually see what the hype around controllers was about and plugged in my PS5 and Xbox controllers, tried each out, and played a good few days without KBM. It was at that point that it hit me why so many people loved controller in Call of Duty: aim assist. Now, before you go brigading in the comments about a salty PC player complaining about aim assist, that's not what I'm gonna do. I get why aim assist is a thing in this game, because honestly, I have no idea how you'd aim on a controller without it. I've heard some people turn it off, or at least they claim to, and I honestly have no clue how they do it. Maybe it's because I'm just not used to using a controller controller, but I felt personally like aim assist was something that I needed when using it. Controller is so much more limiting in motion and ability and in how you can work with it compared to KBM. While you can use your hand to essentially move your aim on a KBM system, on controller you're limited to joysticks and your thumbs. You have a whole surface with a mouse, so really your only limitation is how big is your surface. Additionally, if you don't have things like paddles or a more advanced controller, you've got to move your fingers a lot more, decreasing your competitive ability, and on top of that, stick drift is a thing and can really mess with the way you move in the game. Aim assist in a way makes sense from a technical perspective if you're trying to combine a playing field where people on both KBM and controller are competing in the same games. You want to ensure that players aren't disadvantaged because when a KBM player is really good, they stomp on everyone in their lobbies and it can definitely feel not so fun to compete against people like that. KBM players sometimes get to a point where their aim looks like aimbot, many of them even get accused of cheating when they're not, and so a lot of controller players felt like they were just being pressured to keep up against someone who had a sort of advantage over them. Upon figuring out the movement system and aiming and shooting and things like that in some bot lobbies I created in a private match, I realized precisely why everyone loved controller so much. The movement felt interestingly smooth. The aim assist made it so much easier for me to just snap onto targets without really having to do too much. Yeah, I still had to put some work into it, sure, but it wasn't as hard all of a sudden and my mind was absolutely blown. I then understood why people loved controllers so much for this game. There was a clear advantage to using one in Call of Duty, except for the fact that I didn't really know how to get better with it and I was also growing frustrated. Suddenly sniping became harder and so did quickscoping, orienting my shots became more difficult. Sure, spinning all the way around was easier because my hand didn't go flying into my keyboard side, but I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do in some scenarios. I started thinking about every death I took in the game and how I would have been able to easily avoid that by just jumping or sliding away by pressing one button on my keyboard. My movement also suddenly wasn't as good anymore. I tried doing some movement things in Call of Duty that I saw online besides slide canceling, but was frustrated with trying to remember which buttons did what, and then the many movement guides or whatever suggested different button layouts and each person had a reason for each to the point where I had no idea who was right, and after trying all of them, I still wasn't happy with the movement. Also, I had to learn about things like dead zones, which I didn't even know what it was before, and to tell you the truth, I don't really know if I could explain it if asked, suddenly and spontaneously. And that's the thing that KBM has advantages in: mapping keybinds. Your fingers naturally rest on WASD and everything is basically the touch of a button. Sliding is easy because you just tap the key you've bound to the slide function. Jumping is easy because you just hit the space bar. Your hand resting on the keyboard doesn't really need to move or anything like that because your few fingers just do the job for you. Also, if you're experienced with typing and you naturally just memorize keys, it's so easy because you never even need to so much as glance down at your keyboard. There's a sort of endless level of possibility with this type of peripheral. Plus, your mouse's movements are up to you entirely. Two hands are used for different functions, so instead of holding the one unit being a controller, you can map everything comfortably on your keyboard and then on your mouse. Then again, you can't really trick shot the same way on KBM that you can on controller, because you try spinning your entire arm around 360 degrees, right? It's not really gonna work that way. On a controller, just spin the joystick around and you can do it. Granted, you need to do more than that for a trick shot, but I think you get what I'm trying to say here. Plus, you're not the only one playing. You're competing against an entire lobby of people. 99% of them are probably on controller, and they have the advantage of the aim assist. So even if you have a lot of skill, you're gonna lose some gunfights here and there because the aim assist just feels like it's tracking you, so you may not stand a chance in the same way that you would have if you had a controller. Additionally, aim assist feels like it stabilizes your shots really well in a way that KBM can't. With the mouse, you need to physically ensure that you're fighting against any recoil or kickback by adjusting the position of the mouse, but you can't do that on a controller, and you don't even need to think about that much either. You also need to physically track people by moving your hand along with them rather than having a system do it for you. Plus, if you reach the edge of the table, all of a sudden you can't really track people anymore, but you're never gonna reach the edge of a table with a controller. I don't see how you could anyways. If we want to even look beyond that, no pros in CDL play on mouse and keyboard. It might be because it's banned, I don't know, but all of them basically play with controllers, and many of them even admit that they have no clue how people with KBM could compete in a competitive sense in Call of Duty when you're using those kinds of peripherals. At the same time though, there are plenty of really talented KBM players right on YouTube that you can find easily, and you can see that they basically dominate their entire lobbies, even against pro CDL players and things like that. However, they need to work on insane movement and laser precise aiming, and that usually requires hours upon hours of training and gameplay. Hours upon hours that many people don't really have in a day, so they don't choose to do that. Also, most of those people who can afford those many hours probably play this game almost full time, or they at least take up any free time that they have just playing and aim training and things like that. So I guess the question that you're probably wondering by now is this: what peripherals did I end up sticking with? I thought for a while that maybe I'd prefer controller because it wasn't too bad of an experience, but every time I tried to get myself to leave KBM alone, I found myself missing the the fun that I had with it, how smooth my movement and actions were with it. Maybe it's because I've been on KBM for so long and I just naturally got used to it. Maybe it's just because I prefer KBM for a lot of games, so I usually orient myself to play on it. Maybe it's because I mostly use my PC over my consoles on most days. I don't know precisely what the exact reasoning for it is, but overall, I decided that I'd stick with KBM for Call of Duty, fully accepting that sometimes I will lose to aim assist. I'm not looking to become a CDL pro, right? I just want to play, and at the end of the day, for me, playing is about having fun, and I just couldn't get the same fun out of a controller that I could on KBM. The thing is though, if you find yourself struggling with KBM, then consider using a controller. It might make your life easier, but it'll take a few days for you to figure out the movement and how it all works. I also think it's because I'm impatient and I didn't want to learn to use a new peripheral all of a sudden in a game I was used to doing well with on KBM, but anyways, aside from that point, I think for me the advantages of a controller didn't outweigh the disadvantages of KBM. So can a KBM player actually compete against controller players in Black Ops 6 or Call of Duty in general lately? I think so. I think it requires faster reaction times, more precision, more time really to learn, but if you can get those things down, then yeah, you can compete. It's not as easy and you'll lose sometimes, but overall you might feel more like you have the advantage in some instances. Honestly, like I can't really lose the ability to quick scope easily with a mouse. I'm sorry, like I tried a ton of stuff on controller and nearly threw it at one point, so I think I'll be fine with KBM for now. Long story short, you can compete, you just gotta put more work into it though, and that might be a reason why so many people don't really want to learn KBM in general, because it just takes more time for you to get used to. And at the end of the day, aim assist does make your life a lot easier when you're competing in a game like Call of Duty, but like I said before, the advantages of aim assist don't really outweigh the disadvantages of KBM. Now with that, I'll wrap things up there. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on another upload. Comment below your thoughts on KBM versus controller in Call of Duty and what peripheral you play on. And that's all for today, folks.
Blue, check your fire! 5 in a row by my count.